The final game week of the 23-24 draft season is upon us. Still lots to play for, I'm sure, in your draft leagues. So let's get straight into it. Welcome back to the Draft FC podcast, the podcast, website and YouTube channel dedicated to all things official draft FPL. My name is Mitch and I'm your host for the final game week preview of the season, looking ahead to game week 38. So this is it. Another long season reaches its conclusion, and I want to start right at the top by thanking all of you that have joined us for another ride this season. All your messages throughout the season make sure that I don't feel like I'm just speaking into a void. And some of the messages that have been trickling in over recent weeks where you're sharing your successes is the best part. And although a lot of those have been very kind and, about the support that you've had from the podcast and the site for those of you that are members, remember that these pods are designed not to be didactic or instructive. They're designed to be a space in which you can sound out some of your own thoughts, bounce some of your own ideas off of whilst you're driving to work, doing the washing up, walking the dog with this podcast on in the background, in a game which, as I'm sure you can imagine, is impossible to give a one-size-fits-all approach to. So remember, the successes are yours, but the joy is something hopefully we can feel together. Anyway, I'm so glad I waited until all of the Game Week 37 games had concluded to do this prep. I was literally midway through writing up some notes on how I thought Reece James would be a good punt for Game Week 38 when he got sent off. In terms of the Premier League, relegation is now decided. We do still have a title race on the final day. The rankings for the final European places still have to be sketched out. And the mid-table sides are also still jockeying for final positions, with the likes of Wolves, for example, still have the potential, depending on results going their way, moving up from 13th to 10th in the league, so which is a big amount of money for teams like that. Now, if you've been listening for a while, you have heard me mention the idea, which wasn't an idea that I've invented, called expected narrative, X-narrative. And for those of you that have glossed over this previously, what that is, it's basically the intangible stat which takes into account the stories that float above the field of play, tries to account for the subplots, the headlines and the emotion that often comes with sporting events, which numbers don't usually accurately take into account. Take last week, we discussed Hudson-Odoi having high expected narrative, taking on his boyhood club for the first time since leaving, and he goes and scores with an XG of just 0.15. That is expected narrative. Game Week 38 means, naturally, a number of stories will be reaching a conclusion, and so that expected narrative for a lot of individual teams, players, managers, will be reaching a high point, because a lot of those players and managers will be keen to write a final chapter in a way that they deem fit. And that's exactly what we need to do as draft managers, regardless of whether you've already got the title sewn up, you're already confirmed rock bottom, or whether you've still got a lot to play for. There is still plenty of pride to fight for regardless of your situation. So for those that do still have positions to fight for, those that still have playoff finals to win, keep your head, stick to the principles that have got you where you are now, and remember that sometimes not making a move can be just as difficult but far more effective than bringing in a player just for the sake of change. So I'm recording this episode on Thursday, the 16th of May, so any team news, injury developments or press conference info are up to date as of then, and of course, subject to change. We'll have a lot of press conferences, I believe, tomorrow, so we will have a lot of new info to play around with before the waivers on Saturday, and I'll continue to tweet predicted lineups, for example, right up until the deadline, as I always do. So without further ado, let's get straight into the main section. So let's kick things off with the final waiver watch of the season. This is a top 100 waiver watch looking at the players moving in and out of top 100 leagues last week. And the main player coming in, probably unsurprisingly, was Thiago Silva with a whopping 70% move in top 100 leagues, which is possibly the highest I've seen all season long. So absolutely massive move towards getting Thiago Silva in. and probably for good reason. If you think about expected narrative, he is going to be right up there playing his final game at home for Chelsea in game week 38. The other players coming in were Gusto, good move. Jacob Murphy, good move. Adingra, not so good a move, as I suggested in the last pod. Longstaff, good move. And Veltman, good move. So pretty good success there for the main waivers in. The players leaving were Maguire, Rogers, Ortega, Elanga, Aina and Shah, which, again, none of those would have really hampered your side if you dropped any of those players. Let's have a look at the fixtures. Now, in recent years, Game 38 has averaged more than 3 goals per game, which is above sort of general season average in the Premier League. There is always a lot of chat about teams that have nothing to play for, seeming to be worse punts than teams that have something on the line. But does this actually ring true? Last year, the top 5 was set come Game Week 38, regardless of the results on the final day. So in essence, none of them had anything to play for. City lost, Arsenal smashed Wolves 5-0, Man United won, Newcastle drew, and Liverpool drew 4-4 with Southampton, if you remember. So from those 5 teams with nothing to play for, 2 wins, 2 draws, and a loss. Last year, the relegation battle was also done, and of those 3 teams, we saw 1 win, 1 draw, and 1 loss. We look one further year back in 21-22, the top 5 all had something to play for in terms of the title race, maintaining their position in the top 4 race, or trying to break into the top 4 for the team in 5th. And in that scenario, with all top 5 teams having something to play for, all 5 teams won. In that season, 21-22 season, there was also jeopardy over the final relegation spot between Burnley and Leeds. Burnley lost at home and Leeds managed to win away at Brentford. So overall, it seems the good teams win when they need to on the final day. The rest of the league, the results don't really fit much of a pattern and can go anyway. So make of that what you want, looking at the fixtures for the weekend. Just quickly, in terms of clean sheets, my main picks, including the obvious ones, City and Arsenal, I think are the only ones I'd strongly back. My wild card clean sheet pick for Game Week 38, and particularly for those of you who are chasing, possibly those of you that are in classic scoring leagues who've got quite a chunk of points to make up in order to get to the next position above, or even leapfrog a couple of positions. One tactic that you would have heard us discuss in previous years, and I'm sure a lot of you do anyway at times, is just absolutely loading up on all of the defence from a single team. So you go all or nothing on a clean sheet. So if you get the goalkeeper plus 4 defenders, you are looking at 30 points from that team keeping a clean sheet, barring any yellow cards or attacking returns. But obviously, if they don't keep a clean sheet, you're looking at between 5 and 10 points, depending on those things too. So it's quite a high risk, but if you've got 1 game week left and a lot of ground to make up, or you're in a matchup that seemed pretty stacked against you, it is a tactic that you can look at. So my wildcard clean sheet pick is Nottingham Forest away at Burnley. Now, I like them as well because the ownership of their defenders is generally hidden gem territory. So you shouldn't have too much trouble claiming them all off the waivers. So, even the likes of the goalkeeper Sells, then Aina, Murillo, Bolly. The right back spot we're still waiting for news on. Could be Nico Williams if he's fit. If not, it would be Montiel. But essentially, all 4 or 5 of those players will probably be in your waiver pile right now. And if you want to make that massive swing, high risk, high reward, that would be the team I would look at. So let's have a chat about some of the fixtures individually. Let's start by discussing the games that have absolutely nothing riding on them. Because, as I said, these can be just as entertaining as the ones that do have some pressure on them. Palace against Villa. As I say, Villa have now secured 4th. Palace are basically just squabbling over some mid-table positions, how high they can finish in the bottom half. Both teams capable of scoring a few on their day. I fancy Palace for this one, much the same way I fancied them last week. Villa were popping the champagne bottles in midweek, so who knows how they're going to turn up. And yeah, I expect Palace players will be popular, and a lot of you will already have them in your teams already and will probably just be holding them. Next is Liverpool and Wolves. Wolves are limping into the summer, and of course it's Klopp's final home game at Anfield for Liverpool. So expect a narrative off the charts for them as a club. This is going to be nothing, I think, but a fun day out in the sun for Liverpool. It could be a big score. It could be the sort of day that Van Dijk pops up with one from a corner, and as good a chance of any of a clean sheet for the final week. But Liverpool defenders have pretty much maintained very high ownership. There is one you probably can grab, who we'll be discussing later on in the Hidden Gems section. And then that team I just mentioned as my wildcard clean sheet pick, Burnley against Forest. Whichever way this result goes, Forest are going to set a Premier League record for the lowest points tally to survive the drop. Currently on 29, a win would see them on 32, which would still take the biscuit for the lowest points tally to survive in the Premier League. So incredibly lucky that there were 3 worse teams than them in the league this season, but should never really have been anywhere near it given the quality that they possess in the squad. So I fancy Forest to be in a good mood without that lingering threat of relegation anymore. I would back the likes of Gibbs White, Hudson-Odoi, Chris Wood to have a big day out. And as mentioned, could be a good wildcard pick for someone looking to load up on the whole set of defenders. Luton against Fulham, and a similar situation to that game, though Fulham at least have the possibility of finishing a place or 2 higher up with a win. Mathematically, Luton technically aren't officially relegated, but they effectively are, as they need to turn around a 12-goal swing in goal difference with Forest. So, in other words, they would need to win 6-0, and Burnley would have to beat Forest 6-0. So you do wonder if this will be quite an open game. Whatever the result, the Luton fans will be proud of their efforts this season. I'm sure they'll get a very good send-off at the end. I'm expecting both teams to score with plenty of the Fulham boys on the score sheet, and I mentioned a couple of those in the main segment too. And then Sheffield United against Spurs. Now, I'm probably putting my foot in it by suggesting this has nothing riding on it, because if Sheffield United beat Spurs and Chelsea win, then they would leapfrog Spurs into 5th. They've got a far superior goal difference. Again, I do expect both teams to score in this one. It could be a last-minute opportunity for some stat padding for the Tottenham attacking players. All depends really what mood they're in after the City game. Obviously, the press conference from Ange Postecoglou was hardly glowing, and he was in a very foul mood. So we'll have to you wonder what the mood's going to be like in training this week. Don't be surprised if the first goal on Sunday afternoon comes from Sheffield United and your clean sheet that you've been banking on is ruined instantly. So I personally am not going anywhere near them as a clean sheet potential. I have Pedro Porro in my team for attacking returns only. But yeah, I'm sure lots of you will be eyeing up Spurs just given who they're playing against. The important games, obviously Arsenal and City, both vying for number 1 still. Arsenal against Everton, and they need a win, essentially. They can't, they won't know really exactly what's going on in the City game. They need to win. I can see Everton getting absolutely battered. I think they're going to be just looking to steamroll Everton from the first minute, and could be a big day out for the Arsenal players that we'll have had in our draft teams for pretty much all season because they've been too good to drop. And then, of course, City, as above, really, should be... I'm expecting a big win for City. Out of the 2 games, this feels like it probably has the most potential to be a 5 or 6-0, just given the kind of mood at West Ham, which is really kind of on the decline as the season winds up. The fact that they've already had the kind of home game send-off for Moyes means I'm not really seeing them putting up much of a fight, but they do have players that can hurt City. And if there was going to be a wobble in this scenario on Sunday afternoon, an early goal from Bowen running through is the kind of thing that you could maybe see. But I don't really see it. I think City were looking at the Spurs game as the main stumbling block. They did look a bit nervous in that game. And I don't think they're going to have any nerves for this one. And it should be fairly routine. And then finally, the fixtures that involve the other European positions. So obviously excluding Spurs in 5th, 6th and 7th should are likely to see those teams qualify for Europe. It does depend slightly on the FA Cup final result, because if Man United win, then they will automatically be admitted to the Europa League. If City win, then it opens up 7th spot as an extra position in the Europa Conference League. So, all of those teams involved, Chelsea, Newcastle and Man United, will be looking to win. Chelsea probably have the easiest fixture on paper at home to Bournemouth. I expect them to win that. Newcastle away at Brentford, I think, could be tricky. Man United away at Brighton, again, could be tricky for them, depending on what mood Brighton are in, though their form has been very, very up and down. Then quickly, I just thought, just because of where we are in the season, I would do a quick I'm calling Game Week 1 Rewind. So just before we get into the main section, I thought it'd be fun to look back on my notes that I made ahead of Game Week 1 at the beginning of the season and who the players were that I was talking about then and how that would sound if I was mentioning them now. Now, we had Urian Timber in there and we had Hickey in that one, who obviously have missed out through injury, so probably unfair to discuss those. Rice was on there. He's had a very fine season. Diaby was there. He started the season very well. Lallana, for some reason, was in there. Was a complete dud. And our most hidden gem pick for that episode was none other than Jared Branthwaite for Everton, who currently sits as the 4th highest scoring defender in the game. And in even 16-team leagues, his ownership is well up in the mid-90s, about 95%. So he went on to become a massively important player this season for those that picked him up, but started way back when in Game Week 1 as a most hidden gem player. So into the main picks. Thiago Silva is the first one for Chelsea. Very high on the expected narrative charts, given it will be his final game for the Blues before he moves back to Brazil. Bournemouth at home isn't the easiest game on paper. As I said, I still think it's the easier game of that clutch of teams fighting for the final European positions. But it's also one final opportunity, not only for a clean sheet, but for Silva to nut one in from a corner and celebrate in front of the crowd at Stamford Bridge. Chelsea, of course, do have that massive trophy to fight for, which would be toppling Spurs out of nowhere. And they will be well up for that. So I don't see anything other than a Chelsea win to put the pressure on that scenario. Ownership for Thiago Silva is very high, though. He's still available in a handful of leagues, but he could be the only player you're able to find as part of a trade deal. And if I had him, I wouldn't really be looking to trade him away this week. Next is Rice, who, for me, in terms of real-life Premier League, is hands down signing of the season. Brought in to add solidity to the Arsenal midfield, and he's done far more than that by adding plenty of goals and assists as well. He's now on 7 goals, 9 assists for FPL managers. 14th overall in terms of total FPL points, which is an amazing haul. And given the potential for a sort of carnival atmosphere to develop, if Arsenal get on a roll against Everton, you wouldn't bet against Rice seeing to add to those attacking returns. Next is Hudson-Odoi, whose ownership still remains quite modest. If we just look at 8-team leagues, he's hidden gem territory. Ownership is just 3%. In 10-team leagues, it's a bit higher at 22%. But either way, there's a lot of availability for him on there. I suspect a lot of the drop-off last week was simply because he wasn't a double game week player, and lots of people were moving in on the likes of Longstaff and Mudryk and Murphy and those players. Say, one of our high expected narrative picks last week. If you did get him, I would very much stick with him. And if you didn't, it may not be too late to pick him up. As I said, given the difference in moods between Burnley and Forest, could be a big day out for Forest to round the season on a small high. 3 goals in 2 for 3 goals in the last couple of games, 8 goals for the season now. And you wonder, could he hit double figures in terms of goals? Could he hit the 10-goal mark on the final day with a couple of goals? You never know. Teammate Morgan Gibbs-White has already hit double figures for assists this season, and he extended that to 12 after the Chelsea game despite the loss. Very disappointing start to the season. Finally has been rewarded in the latter half of the season with pretty consistent returns in Game Week 24. And as a season holder of him myself, I drafted him in my main league and just never been able to let go of him. You know, he's eventually paid back the trust I've put in him, and I will continue to put that trust in him in Game Week 38. A couple of the Fulham midfielders. I think Fulham could be a very overlooked team this week, as many will just assume they're not going to really do much away at Luton on the final day. But so results haven't been that bad in the last few weeks for Fulham, and it's a chance to finish a spot or two higher up in the league. I think, as I said earlier, I think Luton will score, so I'm not really interested in the Fulham defence. If you did fancy a clean sheet, they're another one where you could very easily get the whole set if you wanted to look that way. But in terms of midfield options, I think Iwobi and Pereira are the standouts. Pereira would be my preference, but his ownership is much higher. In 8-team leagues, he is taken in 13%, so there's a lot of availability there. In 10-team leagues, he's taken in more than half, so he's available in 41% of leagues. Iwobi is far more available, but I think given the recent form over the last month or two, Pereira is definitely the one you would want. And I think given some of the clear out I'm going to have in my own midfield in a couple of my draft teams, Pereira is the sort of player that I would have penciled in as maybe a second or third choice if I don't get my priority picks. There's some strikers. Another one very high on the expected narrative chart is Ivan Toney. It will be his final home game for the Bees. The long-awaited return in Gameweek 21 started with a flurry of returns, 5 in 5 games. But since Gameweek 25, he has managed just 1 assist and no further goals. So he has one final opportunity now to score in front of the Brentford fans at home to Newcastle, who, as I said, have plenty to fight for positionally on the final day. So high is the expected narrative for this event that I wouldn't be going anywhere near the Newcastle clean sheet this week, or goalkeeper. This is one only possible really through a trade, but given how low his stock is at the moment, you might have a reasonably good chance at getting hold of him for the final week off of whoever does have him. So, I would look to make a semi-cheeky offer for him. But, I think anyone that did pick him up in Game 21, if they've held him this long, they're probably not going to be too thrilled about getting rid of him for Game 38, when I think lots of people will be expecting him to go out with a bang. One of the few beacons of hope for Brentford in terms of planning for life without Toney has been Yoane Wissa's form this year. He's now got 5 returns in his last 6 appearances, 2 of those off the bench, say at home to Newcastle. They are going to be overlooked, I think, in a lot of leagues. And while this is another move you would probably only be able to make by approaching a fellow manager for a trade, again, I don't think it would take a huge amount to get him, and you could even offer some more glamorous players, a Darwin Núñez, for example, a Nico Jackson, possibly. But yeah, I think Vissa's got quite a lot of upside, and, someone's got to assist that Toney hat-trick that's coming in. And then finally, for Liverpool is Gakpo. He started getting the starts, getting the minutes lately. I do have a slight concern Klopp could opt for Darwin Núñez in his final game in charge as more of a nod to someone that's been there much longer and been through a lot more with him. But we can't overlook the steady flow of attacking returns that Gakpo's put up since Game Week 20, getting an attacking return roughly every 120 minutes of football. Expecting goal involvements of 2 over the last 3 games, of which he's managed 3. So he's overperforming there. I didn't realise how high his roster percentage has remained all season, even during the times where he's been out of the team, not once crossing below the 90% threshold, even in 10-team leagues. He's someone that would likely have to form part of a trade again if you wanted him for the weekend with his price at a high. If you've also got an idea that Darwin could get a start for the last one and you own Gakpo yourself, conversely, it could be the perfect time to sell him to somebody else. I'm not fully decided yet. It may come out in the press conference info, or I might have a look at some of the Liverpool fan forums as to who they think is more likely to start, but it's not one I've fully settled on yet. But as it stands, I do have Gakpo penciled into the starting 11, I believe. In terms of hidden gems, Dragic in for Spurs, I expect to start again if you fancy a bit of Tottenham clean sheet action. Tomiyasu in 8-team league somehow is still in hidden gem territory. It's a bit of a boring pick. He's still part of Arsenal's strongest 11. He'll play against Everton. And it just could be a nice, easy 6-pointer to see you over the line in a tight head-to-head matchup, especially if your opponent has an Arsenal defender or has David Raya themselves, just to help cover off against them. For Liverpool, Jarell Quansah remains in hidden gem territory, very much friend of the pod. He's been a most hidden gem pick once or twice, and he's been in hidden gem section more than once. Continues to confuse me, actually. The draft managers haven't been plumping for him much, but I guess the Liverpool clean sheet has been pretty non-existent. He remains, I think, the most likely to play in the match alongside VVD. As I say, the bookies will tell you that this is as good a chance of a clean sheet as many of the other games this weekend. Personally, I don't see it. I can see this being a both teams to score game, as I see a lot of them, to be honest, but could be a big player next season and could do a fine job to see you over the line in Game 38 too. In midfield, one I just fancy, the numbers don't really point this way, is Ross Barkley. Just got a feeling he might show up for this last one. Last game for Luton in the Premier League. Might be looking to put himself in the shop window ahead of the summer, where there may be a few Premier League clubs looking to retain his services next year. Ownership just 4% in 8-team leagues. The only thing to look out for really is press conference news, which may or may not confirm his health status for this one, as he has picked up a bit of a calf strain in the last outing. But yeah, I guess he's one of those players maybe I'd shoehorn into a bit of an expected narrative, given he may want to just present himself one final time for prospective clubs in the summer. As I said, this is more just a gut one and maybe a player that you're looking for if you're just really looking for a pure differential pick. Another one who's crazy, sat in hidden gem territory, and another player that managers haven't really grasped enough. I know some of my other content creators in this space have been a big fan of him this season, probably more than me, and that's Harvey Elliott. Don't really need to sell him much. He's going to probably start for Liverpool in that big game. Could be a big score, could be a big day for him. And then finally, a hidden gem striker option, which is always nice, is Durant for Aston Villa. After his impressive display, managed to claw them back to that 3-3, which ultimately, that point has meant that they've already confirmed Champions League football. And, could be a chance that he gets a rare start at the weekend. Villa have, as I said, they've secured their place. Champagne was flowing on Tuesday night. Maybe a good chance to reward him for his efforts in what must have been a fairly long season, having to sit and watch Ollie Watkins continue just to perform and not give him the slightest looking for an opportunity in the team. There's no reason they couldn't play alongside each other in a 4-4-2. The squad and the injuries they've got currently would very much lend themselves to that. And for a striker with 9% ownership, even in 10-team leagues, a very obtainable option for the final weekend. And the final most hidden gem pick of the season. So this is a player in less than 10% ownership in 16-team leagues. The options were abysmal. I mean, this is what happens. We scrape and we scrape and we scrape the bottom of the barrel all season. And naturally, the players that we may want to pick up, ownership creeps above 10% and they come out of the catchment zone for this selection. So we've scraped so far through the bottom of the barrel, we're now clawing at the dirt underneath. And, with a little bit of personal sporting bias, it's a Spurs player that I'm highlighting here. Very much low probability to start. Currently do have him penciled in for a starting spot because I think there could be a little bit of rotation, and there will be a lot of rotation around the league. And that's Dane Scarlett. I mean, if he did start, think of the upside. A Spurs number 9, Son on one side, Johnson on the other, Maddison in behind, playing against the worst defence, worst team in the league on the final day. Little chance to go into the season with a high. I think if you're struggling, or even if he just becomes your first substitute striker on the bench, and particularly in 16-team leagues where strikers are very hard to come by down at the bottom, yeah, why not? Again, let's wait and see what the press conference comes out with. Let's see if there's any leaks or sentiment from training ground pictures to suggest he might start. But yeah, I'm not really advocating for this one, but I have to make a selection, and he's mine for the final week. So let's have a quick look at how my predicted lineups are looking for the final week of the season. So obviously this is still Thursday morning, so plenty of time for things to change, injury news to come out, and as I said, managers to tell us that players are fit or not on Friday. For now, a relatively conservative list of selections in line with how teams have been shaping up over recent weeks and months. But I know that there will be a lot of rotation, players that are coming back from injury to give them one little final hello to the fans before the season finishes. Youth players given a start before going into the summer, particularly those mid-table teams who are just looking to blood in some players that maybe haven't had enough minutes. But for now, this is how things are looking. As I said, the main things that are probably going to change. Looking at where I've got for Villa at the moment, I may opt to drop Diaby for Duran. Bournemouth, I don't think will make too many changes. That defence could look different. Aarons maybe would get a start over Smith. I think Brentford will be fairly set. Brighton don't have many options. Burnley, who cares? Chelsea, the biggest thing really is going to be the fitness of Mudryk and whether Nkunku starts. I pretty much decided last night that I was going to put Nkunku in the starting lineup. I think he's one that could be a huge player next season, and he's going to be a really hard player thinking about next season's draft already. A really difficult player to rank, because if he plays 30 plus games, he could be a top 10, top 20 asset potentially for Chelsea. And yeah, I think they'll be keen to just give him more of a showing. So I think if there's any doubt about Mudryk, he will probably start that game. Palace, their lineup is fairly set. The only one for Palace actually is Mark Gay's back fit. He was on the bench for the last game, but so consistent and so solid has that 11 been? I wonder if they'll leave him alone. There's even been talk about him possibly being sold this summer, so they may just keep him wrapped up in cotton wool on the bench. Everton won't change much. Fulham, I don't think will change a lot. Diop got sent off. It sounds like Adebayo is going to be off on a free to one of the other Premier League clubs. So I'm guessing Ream will come back into that one, but that's really only a consideration if you're going to look to stack up on the Fulham defence. As I said, for Liverpool, the main conundrum in my head, I think, is between Gakpo and Darwin Núñez. The longer time goes on, the more I'm filtering towards it being Núñez, but I'm leaving Gakpo in there for now. Luton's fairly set, City's fairly set, Man United don't really have many other options. I'm guessing Rashford will probably start that one. Same for Newcastle. Same for Forest. I don't see that changing too much. Same for Sheffield. Spurs, as I just said, I've got Dane Scarlett currently put in as a number 9. There's no Bissouma for the rest of the season now, so I expect Bentancur to come in as a more conventional number 6, and I expect Spurs to set up in their more familiar 4-3-3 compared to the setup that they did against City, given the calibre of opposition. West Ham as well, I think not much to change there. Wolves, there could be some change here. I'm expecting to have a couple of curveballs thrown for them, purely because of how tough that game is and how little chance they've got in that game. They may just opt, Gary O'Neill may just opt to throw in a couple of players that we haven't seen much of. Still not 100% sure what the fitness of Pedro Neto is, whether he's going to be fit enough to get a start, which may just tweak the system from a sitting sort of one with 2 8s, maybe could just leave them with 2 sitters and have their conventional Neto, Cunha and Hwang up top. But that's something we'll probably learn about in the press conferences. So keep an eye on those. These are free for everyone. If you go on draftfc.co.uk and just go to the menu here and select predicted lineups, anyone can see those. I will probably tweet them again tonight. I'll tweet them again tomorrow night, and I'll tweet them again on Saturday before the waivers process. So, a reminder, the waiver deadline will be on Saturday afternoon at 2:30 UK time, ahead of the full contingent of Sunday fixtures at 4 o'clock. Now remember, for those that want to take advantage of the draft history feature, which is a feature for signed up members at draftfc.co.uk, you will be able to start doing that as soon as the game week concludes. That will allow you to start chronicling the history of your draft league and have that info retained for many seasons to come and stored in the record books forevermore. Please do continue to reach out, share your successes with us. You can DM us through the various channels. If you post publicly on X or Twitter, for example, I'll make sure to retweet any of those nice messages that you post up. Believe it or not, we are already planning for next season. There are loads of exciting new features that will be coming to the site. We're going to make the draft prep much better, and that work will start very, very soon. So if you want to stay up to date with everything going on, make sure you're keeping tabs on us across all the various means. Of course, make sure you're following on respective podcast platforms that you're listening to us on. If you've not ventured to our YouTube channel yet, make sure to head over to there and subscribe to the channel. For those watching on YouTube right now, again, make sure you've clicked the subscribe button. Give us a thumbs up if this is the sort of content you like. And if you want to stay up to date with any of the videos dropping, because they'll come a little bit more ad hoc throughout the summer, then hit that little bell option to be notified as soon as we drop a new episode. And then finally, I'd urge you to follow us across whichever socials you use. Probably the places we're most active is X, or formerly known as Twitter. You follow us there at draft_FC. Also, probably the most responsive avenue to message and get a reply. I will respond to all messages pre-deadline, so any dilemmas you're having with your squad, don't be afraid to reach out if you haven't before. Also on Instagram, we're on there. Probably need to be a bit more consistent with that. And all of the links for these are in the show notes somewhere below. Before we do get into next season and all of the prep that comes for draft day again, there will be some season review content, which I will look to plan after a little break this week, probably next weekend. Let the dust settle on the season a little bit so we can take stock of how things have shaped up. I'm also possibly planning, depending on time, a set of pods which some of our longer listeners will be familiar with from a couple of years ago, where I got some of you on to discuss draft. You know, get some community voices on the airwaves. If that's something that you might be interested in, Also, give me a shout in the DMs and I'll add you to a little list that I'm keeping. No firm plans for that yet, but if that is something you might be interested in, if you've got particular tactics you want to share, if you've got particularly lively, interesting leagues that you want to tell the world about, anything at all, it will be a very open and free platform to chat about draft. But for now, let's leave things there. Of course, reach out, as I said, with any specific dilemmas you're having for your teams, and I'll reply to all of those. And for the last time for the 23-24 season, as always, stay shook.